Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for the second half of our weekly Penn State podcast by Isaiah Maldonado, our Post-Gazette and Nittany Lions insider. We're going to be talking about Terry Smith staying on staff at Penn State, getting to a little bit of some of the early staff decisions that Matt Campbell has made in his early days. A lot of this is reported. It's not official yet, but we can take it on pretty good authority, and we can certainly digest the direction that things seem to be moving there, specifically with Jim Knowles. We're also going to talk about the bowl game against Clemson that was announced on Sunday. What's at stake for Penn State in this matchup against another kind of peer program on a national level, even though both are clearly coming off of rougher seasons? Would you have rather seen Pitt? I think I would have. We'll see what Isaiah has to say about that. We're also going to talk about how many guys may or may not play in this game. Before we get started, we want to remind you that the show is presented by FanDuel. Isaiah, let's start with the Terry Smith thing. I have very mixed feelings about it. I get why, on some level, it was probably necessary, given the circumstances of how this search unfolded. You don't get a high school recruiting class before you're able to announce Matt Campbell as the coach. His players are signed to the Cyclones for at least the next year. So you're kind of going to be starting from square one in a lot of ways in terms of picking up some guys who might still be out there available to be signed. I don't think Penn State's only going to have a recruiting class of 2 kids. They'll probably get 10, 15, something like that, but they're not going to be the kids that you probably ultimately would have wanted at the start of this process. You're also going to have to recruit your own roster, convince some of these guys to stay. I get why Terry Smith was important there in terms of continuity. That said, does that not create an inevitable cleave in the locker room? We've not heard from Terry Smith yet. I'm eager to hear what his thoughts are on staying at Penn State. But look, the guy made a very public campaign for the job. He had the players holding up signs, hire Terry Smith. I can't think of really any circumstances where you had someone pushing so hard for something and then you stayed in a lesser role than the one that you had now. To me, that's going to create a natural cleave in the locker room. There are going to be, even if you retain a good chunk of these guys, there are going to be guys that look at Terry Smith as their leader, possibly more so than Matt Campbell, even though Matt Campbell has the job. I don't like the setup there. I also don't like the setup in terms of the fan base. We talked a little bit in the last video about that there is a faction of fans who rabidly want someone with Joe Paterno ties to have the job. That is why there was so much energy around Terry Smith, because he was able to do what Matt Rule didn't perform late in the season. But listen, that's who was primarily supporting his candidacy, was this faction of people who want to go back to the Joe Paterno era, who see Terry Smith as the guy there. And I do wonder, if things start to go sideways at any point in time, are you not going to have the hire Terry Smith chance? Terry, those chants that we heard after the Nebraska game. I don't know if we'll hear them next year, because obviously I think even the most rabid Paterno supporters will give Matt Campbell a honeymoon period, even if they're not as good. Maybe if they're like a 7, 8, 9 win team, I think there will be some level of patience. But the further we get into this, Isaiah, it makes sense now. I don't know how much sense it makes 4 years from now, which is the deal Terry Smith got, because I think it has the potential to be divisive, just knowing this fan base as we do.
I agree. I think this really does depend. The relationship is going to depend on how I think Terry Smith goes about it. And I have faith that I think Terry Smith, with how much he advocated for the position of head coach and how badly he wanted it, I think he also made it just as clear and held his word on it that he would look to stay into Penn State in any just capacity possible. And while his role hasn't been released yet, there's been reports that he's supposed to fit into that associate head coach position, which would definitely give him a substantial leg up on his previous position, much more influence, much more saying what goes on. But at the end of the day, Matt Campbell is the guy. And I think that even Terry Smith knows that. I don't think he would stay if it wasn't on board with somebody who he think he could lead next to but also take a little bit of a step back and feel comfortable doing so. So I think from his end, I have faith that that's going to be upheld. And I think with the players, that gets a little bit more complicated. But at the end of the day, I believe that if Terry Smith is advocating, saying, "Hey, like, guys, I'm still here. I'm not going nowhere. I'm here to help lead this team." But at the end of the day, Campbell is the guy, and I stayed because I felt that this is somebody I had confidence in. I wouldn't have done that if I felt like this was somebody who was gonna lead us in the wrong direction. So I think that in itself is something that hopefully the players can kind of rally behind. I think there was obviously the sheer amount of support from players specifically to bring Terry in as their guy. You've heard Micah Parsons chime in, say that, like, Penn State should just obviously bring him in as the next head coach. So there was a lot of support on that end. But I think they would rather have him in some capacity than no capacity. And they're getting him in a much bigger capacity than he was before Franklin was dismissed. Obviously, now he's going to continue to be around the entire team, continue to be a leader. He's just not going to be the one who has the end-all, be-all. So I think it can be divisive. I think it can create those problems. Specifically from the fan perspective, I do agree that they would probably give him a grace period. I think that they would at least let him kind of get a hold of the reins and see how he leads the program. But it can get very messy down the line if, year 2, year 3, Penn State is better, but not exactly what they could be. And you start hearing those Terry chants when they're potentially, starting off a season strong, have a bad game, barely lose. And you have those seeds that are already planted because of what he's done this year. So I think that is where the problem is going to come from. I trust the players enough that having Terry Smith in some capacity and in a greater capacity than they had before Franklin was fired can do enough to kind of, douse the flames. And I trust that Terry is good enough of a leader to be able to douse the flames himself. But I think inevitably this is a problem that they will, run into if Matt Campbell doesn't hit the ground running.
Terry's a class act. I don't really doubt his ability to handle things within the walls of the Lash building, but he cannot control what happens outside of it. And I think that's where my big concern is. We mentioned in our video earlier on Tuesday, we talked about the, LeVar Arrington says Joe Paterno, Anthony Lubrano leaked a lot of the Kalani Sitake stuff. Well, he didn't say specifically what they leaked, but he said that they were leaks throughout the process. He blamed it on them. We don't know that that's 100% true. We do know that Joe Paterno and Anthony Lubrano have fought against a lot of football funding, that they've wanted to rename the stadium after Joe Paterno and all of that. They are, on some level, the resistance here. And you do wonder if having their preferred candidate on staff is going to stoke those flames, whether or not Terry Smith is the one doing it. So, those are the concerns that I have, is that this could get really ugly through no fault of Terry Smith's own, over time. And that's why you hire your guy early, so that he gets to have his people and do things the way he wants to do them. I think you had to keep Terry Smith out of necessity. So I don't know. I have concerns about how that setup is going to go. I do, I would hope if Terry Smith is going to be on the staff with his recruiting ties, that he can become a true kind of ace recruiter here, maybe become what Larry Johnson was for Bill O'Brien, because he stayed over from the Joe Paterno staff. He was kind of that guy, but we know that Larry Johnson eventually moved on as well. So we'll keep an eye on how that unfolds. Isaiah, let's talk a little bit about the staff that's apparently coming together. It looks like Jim Knowles will not be back. Reports say that Jon Heacock is going to be Matt Campbell's guy at defensive coordinator. They've got a long-time relationship. That seems like the natural move there. Just in terms of you do want to give your guy latitude, and if you're going to put Terry Smith on the staff, you can't also then say, well, we're paying Jim Knowles $3 million for the next 2 years each year, so you got to keep him too. I think that's just the way it had to be. I would have liked to see Jim Knowles back, just because I do have a lot of respect for what he's done all the way up to this point. Obviously, this was not the year you would have liked to have with him on James Franklin's staff, but especially if there was a little bit of continuity there in terms of the roster, I think you could have seen improvements. We know that he's a championship caliber coach. but I don't think that you could have imposed that on Matt Campbell.
Yeah, no. It's one of those things where, luckily Campbell said it himself that one of the first questions he asked was, I would like to keep Terry on staff. So, luckily they were aligned there. But at the end of the day, this is something as to where they need to be able to give Matt Campbell the keys to be able to have his guys, to be able to build this championship staff that he's looking to build on his own terms. And unfortunately, when you look at things from a purely objective angle, you probably don't have the season at defensive coordinator that Jim Knowles had and keep him otherwise if you weren't paying him the money and if he didn't have the success in the past. And we went off of just the results from this year and going off of what you used to be able to do and what that expectation was set because of your success at Ohio State. It'd be hard to imagine that anybody would be able to keep their job unless they just had a very, very just highly touted, highly respected resume, and that is Jim Knowles, and it still didn't get him enough. I think it's fair. So I think right now it's going to be a matter of trusting Matt Campbell to be able to get his guys in. Jon Heacock did very well at Iowa State in terms of establishing them as one of the better defensive units in the country. He's been there just as long as Campbell was there for. So I have faith in that process, and I think that as unfortunate as for Knowles, I think that I understand why they're moving on from him.
Isaiah, let's talk a little bit about the bowl game. It's going to be Penn State Clemson in the Pinstripe Bowl. There had been a lot of talk. Could you have a rivalry matchup with Penn State, with Pitt? Pitt ends up going to the Military Bowl. You've got some conspiracy theories on the Pitt message boards that Penn State told the Pinstripe Bowl not to invite Pitt. Here's the thing. I don't think that's true. I think the Pinstripe Bowl looked at having Penn State, Clemson, two teams that were in the preseason top 5, top 10. We can have them in a bowl game, and that was the decision. As much as I personally would have liked to see Pitt, Penn State, I think Clemson is the one ACC program that I could say, okay, all right, I want to see that play out. Is that kind of where you're landing, Isaiah? Penn State is an early 3.5-point favorite, according to our friends at FanDuel, by the way. But this was too tantalizing a matchup to pass up, I think.
No, absolutely. I wasn't as sold on wanting the Penn State Pitt matchup. We wanted it for different reasons, just because I wanted them to be able to have a worthy opponent to face off against and to inevitably be able to topple, because I think that would give them even more continuity heading into the offseason, finish on that 4-game win streak, have it be against a team that was just ranked. But I think with Clemson, this is just, I'm seeing on Twitter, it's calling it the disappointment bowl. You got two teams that were AP top 5 preseason going into the year. Obviously, Clemson got off to that rough 1-3 start, I believe. We know what happened with Penn State when it came down to the 5-game losing streak, the 6-game losing streak. So that in itself is a matter of these are two programs that have these expectations and fell quite short of them. So, but I'm excited for the matchup because I think it still does achieve the same goal for Penn State. I still think a win over Clemson is enough, especially with what they used to be, is at least enough to show that Penn State is moving in the right direction. There was no opponent that they were going to be able to go up in the Pinstripe Bowl that if Penn State won, you were going to say that Penn State is back 100%. It just wasn't going to happen. They know Pitt or Clemson weren't that caliber of opponent that you could just have all faith restored in Penn State. But I think that either of them, and especially Clemson, is a good enough opponent to be able to say that if Penn State does walk away with the win, you can say this is in the right direction, and especially looking to see what things kind of look like with the roster. Obviously, Zane Durant made his post saying that he won't be playing in the bowl. He's getting ready for the NFL draft. We're going to see probably a couple more of those from some guys. Seeing what that roster looks like, still being able to pull out a win with a depleted roster, I think can kind of mitigate the struggles that Penn State has had this year.
Yeah, how many guys quickly here at the end, Isaiah? How many guys do you think are going to stay? Are we going to see Katron Allen? Are we going to see Nick Singleton? Are we going to see Dennis-Sutton? Are we going to see Zakee Wheatley? Or are those guys going to do what Penn State players have done in recent years? When you're not in the playoff, they opt out and move on.
I'm really curious because honestly, we spoke about it earlier, guys like Katron, I think can sit down without much of an issue. His draft stock wouldn't be affected. I threw Zakee Wheatley in that same boat. He's been phenomenal all year. One of the most consistent parts of the Penn State defense. Singleton had a resurgence, so honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he did. But I still think in that realm of, Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant, and Nick Singleton, these are guys who I expected to actually play for the fact that these seasons, for a good portion of them, they underachieved. Obviously, I think they all finished strong, which is why I think they might feel like they're in a position to be able to move on from this now. But if Zane Durant, said he's declaring for the draft and foregoing the bowl game, then I don't see why players like Dennis-Sutton and Nick Singleton and other seniors who might have had some down years but still had good moments and have enough faith that they're going to be able to get to where they need to be in the draft to get into a good position, I see no reason why they wouldn't forego either.
Yeah, we'll continue to monitor that. We'll be back next week, Isaiah. We'll get people further ready for this game. We'll talk about how things continue to unfold with the Penn State coaching staff and maybe some recruiting news that may or may not come down the line. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. And please check out our written work over at post-gazette.com. We'll talk to you again next time.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.